Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. It is March 1st, 2018, and I'm sitting here today with you reading a book by Amal Press called The Remembrance of God by al-Suyuti. It's a translation of one of the small essays inside of al-Hawi lil-Fatawi. Imam al-Suyuti, very well known Imam. Really, he came at near the end of the first millennium of Islamic history. And he was basically, you could say, he was the judge almost of all the disputes and the debates that occurred because he had so much material to draw from and so much precedent and so many other scholars' work to look at. So Imam al-Suyuti is probably the most prolific writer. Some people do take against him that he was lenient in the matter of hadith, but in essence, he is one of those polished scholars who is agreed upon. I would say 95%, okay, in what he talked about. So he's one of the a'lam, or the major figures of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And he has this book called al-Hawi lil-Fatawi. It's a collection of fatwa that he wrote. It's 2 volumes, and Amal Press out of England published a small section on Dhikr. Okay, these brothers from the UK. And the reason that I am writing about this or recording this is that we've recently been talking about the most harmful element to a person's happiness. And happiness is something that we all crave. And happiness is something... A sa'ada is something that sometimes you think, well, we're not meant to be happy in this world. This is a test. We're not supposed to be, worried about how we feel. But that's actually totally wrong. And when it comes to happiness, the angel, when he writes down what we did in this life, or what we're going to do in this life, when he enters the womb and writes all our destiny down, the last thing that he writes is, ashaqiyun am sa'id, is that this angel writes down whether or not we are happy or we're going to be miserable. So happiness, sa'ada, and shaqawa are really what we're created to be in one of these 2 states. And the human being is constantly, non-stop, always, at every moment, either trying to avoid misery or attain happiness. At every second of everything's existence, whether it's a cat, if it's warm, is trying to balance that out and get cool. A dog, if he's thirsty, he's trying to find water. The human being is always, at all times, seeking happiness, okay, and trying to move away from misery. The only difference is that between the mu'min and otherwise is who we trust on telling us what happiness is and how it's attained. So that's why the Anbiya are also seeking happiness, right? But happiness for them is something else. Happiness, they've understood and they've been taught by their Lord that happiness is being in line and in taslim, in submission to the divine will. Okay, so they've understood what happiness is. So there's no real difference between between human beings in the idea that they seek happiness. But the difference is what we believe about humanity and what we believe about happiness. Okay, and where it's going to come from, who owns it? Is it owned by someone? Or where's the locus of happiness? Is happiness in our stomach? Is happiness in our loins? In the pleasure of the stomach and food and sex and fame and wealth? Is that where happiness is? The Zuhad are also seeking happiness. There was once a famous Zahid. He was passing by a king, and they had a talk, and the king said to him, the king stopped his retinue, and he said, stop and respect. I respect this Zahid who has left off the dunya for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. He said, the Zahid said, I have to be honest with you. You are a bigger Zahid than me because you're giving off akhirah. You're giving up the akhirah for the sake of the dunya. So your investment and your zuhud is greater than my zuhud. I'm merely giving up a little bit of dunya, okay, and getting a lot of akhirah because I want akhirah. I want jannah. I want to enjoy it. I want its food. I want its all that there's, the maladhat and the pleasures that are there, right? So zuhud, from this aspect, you have to understand what it is also the zuhad. He just understands life differently. He wants happiness too. So what is the point of all this? Is that the issue of happiness is not so much, okay, as the prophets have taught us, by acquisition. In fact, the acquisition of material things, it's more of a headache than anything else. Well, this is what the Anbiya are telling us. The acquisition of material things, the fame, okay? A lot of wealth. Wealth is good, right? It makes you happier. If you know how to be happy, wealth makes you happier. Wealth in itself can't buy you anything. But wealth, if you want, if you know how to be happy, wealth can make you happier. Okay, but otherwise, too much wealth, too much fame, too much material possessions, too much power, okay, all of that is a headache, okay? And so acquisition is what we are trained to think that happiness is by acquiring, whether these material or abstract things. Rather, the Anbiya have taught that happiness is actually by removal. It's actually by removing certain things. And not so much material things. Yeah, material things maybe, right? But ultimately, the greatest happiness is by the removal of envy. Envy is the sin of the heart, that Sayyidina Ali said, that is its own punishment. Right? Envy is one of the biggest calamities that will come upon a person. If he has envy, he will be a miserable person. You could just guarantee that. Now, envy itself is the misery upon seeing the blessing of Allah upon someone else. So that's what it is. Envy is that you don't want to see someone else being blessed. That's the problem. When you see someone else having it good, having wealth, having beauty, having fame, having power, having popularity, having whatever it is, that you feel miserable. Now, the first problem is this. There's two problems here. Number one, the person who is having this type of envy is not remembering and is not recognizing who is the one who is giving out these ni'mas. Okay, he is not recognizing that this ni'mah is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is his decision. That is his judgment. And who are you to differ with it? That's the first thing. Now the second thing, and in that requires taslim, submission. And Imam al-Tahawi says in part of the Aqidah, لا تثبت قدم في الإسلام إلا بالتسليم. Your footing in Islam will never be secure unless you are understood this concept of submission to Allah's will. This is what Allah has willed for you, and this is what Allah has willed for someone else. You have to have that submission. Now, number two is something even more important, and that is, well, what are you jealous about? What are you envious about? You're upset because Allah gave someone some dunya? So you've overvalued the dunya. And this is why envy is actually not a root disease, but it's a function. It's a branch. It's a branch of love of dunya. You can't envy someone unless there's something to envy them about. So if you're a person who loves cars, you're going to envy someone who's got a nice car, right? Or you could envy someone who has a nicer car than you, unless you've removed envy from your heart. You can still love something and not envy people who have it. But in the most case, okay, you love a thing, you're going to envy the one who has it. Even if you have like a neutral envy, which is we call it ghibta. You could call it neutral envy or good envy, that I don't want him to lose it, but I want one too. Okay? But if you're someone who loves cars, you're not going to care if someone gets a medical degree, right? So there has to be an object to the envy, okay? And in this case, the removal of love of dunya is the solution and is the only way and route to the removal of envy. So if the objects of envy, okay, to you, you've nullified them, you've neutralized them in your own heart. So what am I going to be envious about? Then envy cannot exist in such a person. And the second stage of this is that you cannot tell people, the human being doesn't work this way, that you tell them stop loving this or that. It doesn't work like that. Rather, you tell them do love something else. Okay? Displacement is how real zuhud occurs. True zuhud is not that I'm going to stop loving this, stop possessing this, stop having that. Rather, real zuhud is by loving something else so much that you actually have forgotten about the reality of what the other thing that you were thinking about. That's what it's displacement. Real zuhud occurs by displacement. So if we're saying that a person will stop loving some dunya so much, now what do people usually do? The usual mistake that people make is instead of loving one dunya, they just start loving a different dunya. And Ibn Ata'illah, he has one of the hikam, and one of the explanations of it is that it's almost like some people are like donkeys going around in circles. So in certain farms, they need the donkey to go around in circle to move a mill, right? To move a mill or to move some tool or other. So they have the donkey going in circles, okay? Just keep walking in circles. Well, we oftentimes, when we get burned and we can't have one dunya and we have a bad experience with one dunya, what we do, we make this mistake, is that we end up just turning to a different dunya. And then we're going to have the same experience there, right? We focus ourselves from one dunya to the next, and that's the problem. Rather, in contrast, what the Anbiya, what the prophets have come to us to do and to tell us, to really free us from this enslavement to worldly matters and to our nafs, is that they tell us, listen, forget this dunya completely, okay? And I will turn you to the world of the spirit. And that's what the Anbiya have done, and that's their product, that's their sil'ah, is that they turn us from the world of satisfaction and happiness through dunya, which leads to difficulty, because dunya is hard to get. Allah has made dunya hard to get. And it leads to misery, because the dunya is finite, and therefore there's not a lot to go around. Okay? Not everyone could have this dunya, all the dunya, right? Not everyone could have everything. There's a finite number of whatever it is that people love in this world. That's how Allah created it. And number 3, because there's finite and because there are going to be haves and have-nots, you end up with envy. Okay? So it's difficult. It's finite, right? It's hard to get. It takes hard work to get it. It's finite. And on top of that, okay, you end up being a have-not. And everyone in some way, shape, or form is a have-not. And then you end up in a state of misery and envy. Okay? This is the nature, this is the result of chasing dunya. Now, in contrast, the Anbiya tell us, listen, there is something free. Yes, it takes hard work, but not that hard. More time than anything else. And it's a guaranteed result. And it's infinite. There is no one's going to have it. If someone else takes a big portion, they're not taking anything from you. It's infinite on top of that. And what is that? That is Nurullah Azza wa Jal. Okay? That is the nur that we are trying to acquire into our own hearts. And when we acquire this nur into our own hearts, then at that point, what we end up with is a sa'ada al-kubra, a real happiness. Sa'ada al-kubra, of course, is paradise, but sa'ada in this respect is far greater when it is of the heart and it is something in your soul. It is inside of you. It's like the electricity inside of a computer. Like, where is it? I don't know where it is. So its locus is so deep inside the human being, no one can take it away. This is the true sakina that gives people sa'ada. Some people say, the Muslims, why, if they're so good and about everything, well, why didn't the material world advance that much? We say, well, actually the material world did advance, but number 1, it did advance. Number 2, that's not the goal of what prophets do. Prophets don't come to try to advance our material world. And number 3, one of my hunches is that the Anbiya gave people something far greater that made them more satisfied. You find a lot of these investors and a lot of these people that you see in the history books of who advancing the material element of the human condition. You find them oftentimes dissatisfied, miserable. They're searching for something. And they end up with some material thing. Well, I think that the Anbiya, the people who followed them, and when the Ummah at large followed them, you had an Ummah that was more or less satisfied. And that satisfaction allowed them to go at a slower pace. Okay? Businesses. You don't see humongous corporations in the old Islamic world. I think that the guy, when he sold enough rugs, he was satisfied for the day. He has enough money. Let someone else get some money. No big deal, right? There's no this greed and this cavernous, this emptiness that's inside of the heart of the people that made them go for more, always going for more. I think it wasn't there, like in the general civilization of the Muslims. And even in Christendom, because we say that even though they're upon dalala, prayer in general does do something for the human being. So this is the chain, the domino effect here. I've taken you in the last 15 minutes through a domino effect. The first thing is the question of happiness and misery. And we are legitimizing it, that the quest to be happy is legitimate. The only question is, well, who defines what happiness is? Where is the locus of happiness? Where is happiness? Is it in our bank accounts, right? Where is happiness? Okay, where's it going to come from? Okay, and then what are the practices to get there? So then the second thing we said is that it's the removal of envy that is the key to happiness. Okay, getting that envy. And envy itself is a branch from the root. What's the root? The root is love of dunya. And love of dunya, but we never actually define dunya, which we have to do. Is dunya like my job? Is dunya like my wealth? Oh, well, no, I'd love to make money. Everyone wants you got to make money. Everyone wants to make money, right? You need to be successful. You need to have some kind of thing where you sit back at the age of 60 and say, well, I did all this. That's great, right? Otherwise, what am I doing? I'm wasting my time. You need to have something tangible, something physical, right? Unless Allah gave you some degree of iman that we don't have, okay? But even that is not even the sunnah. The sunnah is not just to be on a mountain or in a room alone and wait till you die. This is not the way of Islam. The way of Islam is you have your spirituality by evening. In the daytime, you should go out and produce something. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا قُضِيَتِ الصَّلَاةُ فَانْتَشِرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. If Jum'ah is over, right, then go out and seek the bounty of Allah, right? Go out and work. So we should have something. So dunya is not what people imagine it to be. My career, my degree, my wealth. That's not dunya. Dunya is كُلُّ مَا يُشْغِلُ الْعَبْدَ عَنْ رَبِّهِ. Is everything that busies you from Allah. So if your action is for the sake of Allah, if your career, you're seeking it, right, to fulfill a fard, which is whatever your job is, maybe it's a fard kifaya, okay? Like gynecologist, Muslim woman gynecologist, right? It's a fard kifaya. Some Muslim woman's got to do it, right? When you're going to have the women, you're going to go get checked by men. So there's fard kifaya. And then there are other ways to make your intention sound. And of course, we know how to test whether or not our intention is actually true or if it's a lie. And the way to test it is to compare and to look, are we leaving off the fara'id that Allah gave us in order to do this? Or are we actually doing anything haram to do it? And the moment that we are doing haram and leaving off obligations, fara'id, in order to gain something, then we know that we're liars. Our nafs is playing a game with us. It's not for the sake of Allah. If it's for the sake of Allah, then do what Allah said to do first, which is our fara'id, salah, zakah, Saum, okay, on all these things, and the mu'amalat, the right interactions, and we don't forget him. So that's the definition of dunya. Because envy is a branch of dunya. You can't remove dunya from your heart just like that. We said you have to displace it. With what are you going to displace it? We displace it with the product that the Anbiya have brought down, and they are here to channel the nur of Allah Azza wa Jal, and we put it in our hearts, and the nur of Allah. Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam talked about it. He said the sign of it is that you want to leave, you forget about dunya. You forget about the thing that distracts you from Allah. Literally, he said, the true zuhud is not that you intentionally leave something off. No, you're so busy enjoying his dhikr that you actually forgot about the dunya. It didn't even cross my mind. Something I forgot about it. And you get more interested in matters of the afterlife. And you actually start to prepare yourself for death. You start thinking to yourself, okay, how do I want to die? Do I really want to die with this feud? Do I really want to die with this sin? Do I really want to die with these debts? Literally, right? Do we really want to die, feeling that I should have spent more time with, my kids or more time doing charity or something like that? Do we want to die spending 7 hours a Sunday watching football? See, the brothers, I don't mean to mind someone kicking back and watching a game, right? I'm not even that strict. I don't mind that at all. That sometimes could be good. You sit with your son watching a game. Some brothers, from like 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. How could you? You don't get bored. From 11 to 11. And now it's going to get worse because it's all the betting. In any event, that's a whole nother subject. But the point is, we displace dunya by dhikrillah, love of dhikrillah. And that's what this book is about. So that's really the intro thesis and why I wanted to cover this book, to show the importance of this dhikr. And like everything, when you want to do something, you need friends to do it with. It's hard to do something alone. It's easier to do something together. So this is why he actually talks about the majalis of dhikr and the different ways that dhikr is done. So we're going to cover this little by little. Now you note that this video here is just a still image. In the future videos, when we actually get to the ahadith and the content that Imam al-Suyuti gives, I'm actually going to put up a screenshot of the ahadith so that if you're an Arabic student, you can actually read along and double this up as knowledge and Arabic. So jazakumullah khair, that does it for the first session. Wassalamu alaikum.